The wind whistled across the open plains, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and dust. The town of Redstone sat at the edge of nowhere, a collection of wooden buildings weathered by time and the merciless sun. A single main street divided the place, its surface hard-packed by wagon wheels and horse hooves. The year was 1883, and the West was changing fast, but some hearts and some hurts were too stubborn to be forgotten. Caleb Turner rode into town with a weariness that ran deeper than his bones. He had been gone 5 years, 5 long years of chasing cattle across Texas, hunting bounties through New Mexico, and trying to outrun the ghosts that clung to his past. His hat was frayed, his duster torn at the seams, and his eyes told the story of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. As he passed the old livery stable, a horse neighed in recognition. Caleb slowed his bay gelding and patted its neck, looking around at the town that had once been his home. The saloon still leaned slightly to the left, the sheriff's office door still creaked on its hinges, and the church steeple still cast its shadow over the same graveyard on the hill. Time had stood still in Redstone, except for the people he had left behind. He dismounted outside the general store, boots hitting the ground with a thud. An old man sweeping the porch stopped mid-motion, eyes squinting against the sun. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, leaning on his broom. Caleb Turner, back from the land of the lost. Caleb smiled faintly, "Still keeping this place running, Hank." "Barely." Hank chuckled. "The town ain't what it used to be. Not since the railroad skipped us by." Caleb nodded, glancing down the street. "I figured as much." His gaze drifted toward the far end of town, to a small house with white shutters and a fence that had been mended more times than it should have been. He swallowed hard. "She's still here." Hank followed his gaze, understanding dawning in his weathered eyes. "Rachel's still here," he said quietly. "Widowed near 2 years now." The words hit Caleb like a hammer. He closed his eyes, the wind lifting the brim of his hat. Rachel, the name alone was enough to stir everything he had spent years trying to bury. They had been young once, back when Redstone had been alive with laughter and dance. Caleb had worked on her father's ranch, saving every cent he could to build a future for them. But the war with the Comanches had taken him away, and when he came back, her father had turned him off the land, calling him reckless, dangerous. Caleb had left with anger in his heart and her tears still on his shoulder. Now, she was a widow. He tied his horse and walked slowly down the street. Every step seemed to echo memories: the fairground where he had won her a ribbon, the well where she'd once poured water over his head in laughter, the oak tree where they'd carved their initials. The past wasn't gone, it was waiting. When he reached her house, he paused at the gate. A little boy sat on the porch, carving something with a small pocketknife. His hair was dark like Rachel's, his eyes the same soft blue. Caleb's breath caught. The boy looked up. "You lost, mister." Caleb smiled gently. "Maybe I am. Ma's inside," the boy said, pointing with the knife. "You want me to get her?" Caleb hesitated, then shook his head. "No need, I'll wait." The door creaked open anyway, and there she was, Rachel Miller, though she'd once been Rachel Lee. The years had softened her, but they hadn't taken her beauty. Her hair, once gold in the sunlight, was tied in a loose braid. Her hands were rough from work, her face touched with lines of sorrow and strength. When her eyes met Caleb's, the world seemed to stop spinning. "Caleb Turner," she whispered. "I thought you were dead." "Not dead," he said softly. "Just lost for a while." She stood in silence, torn between joy and anger, between old love and old wounds. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in." Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and biscuits. Caleb removed his hat, churning it in his hands like a nervous boy. "I heard about John," he said after a long silence. "I'm sorry." Rachel nodded, sitting across from him. "He was a good man. Not an easy one, but good. The fever took him quick." "I should have come back sooner," Caleb said. Her eyes hardened. "Would it have mattered? You left, Caleb. You never wrote, never sent word." He looked down. "I wanted to. God knows I did, but your father made it clear I wasn't welcome. And when I heard you'd married, I figured that was the end of my story here. Rachel's hands trembled slightly. You were my story once. The silence that followed was thick with years of what-ifs and unfinished sentences. The boy came in, holding his carving proudly, a small wooden horse. Look, Ma, he said. I made it. Caleb smiled faintly. You've got a good hand there, son. The boy grinned. You think so? I know so. Caleb replied. Your name, Eli, the boy said proudly. Caleb nodded, glancing at Rachel. Strong name. Rachel managed a small smile. John picked it. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Caleb walked out to the old corral behind the house. The boards were worn, the posts leaning, but the land still smelled like freedom. Rachel joined him quietly, arms crossed against the cool air. You planning to stay long? She asked. I don't know, he said. Depends if there's still a place for me in this town. There's always a place for good men, she said, then looked at him. But you don't strike me as the same boy who left. I'm not, Caleb said. The trail changes a man. Takes pieces of him he never gets back. They stood in silence, watching the last light fade. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. You were the only thing I ever wanted to come back to, Caleb said finally. But I came too late. Rachel's eyes glistened. Maybe not too late for something. Days turned into weeks. Caleb found small work fixing fences, helping at the livery, doing the kind of labor that filled the quiet. He didn't speak much, but every evening he found himself near Rachel's house, helping Eli with his wood carvings or mending the porch steps. The town folk whispered, but Redstone had always loved a story, and this one was softer than most. One night, a storm rolled over the plains, the sky split with lightning. Caleb was at the barn when he heard the distant cries, Rachel's voice, sharp with fear. He ran toward the house, boots pounding through the mud. Inside, he found her kneeling beside Eli, who was burning with fever. The boy's skin was pale, sweat soaking his hair. I can't get it down, Rachel cried, eyes wild. He's shaking so bad. Caleb knelt beside her, feeling the boy's forehead. We'll need Dr. Haynes. I'll get him. The bridge is washed out, she said. You'll never make it. Caleb looked toward the storm, then back at her. I'll make it. He saddled his horse and rode hard through the rain, the wind cutting like knives. The river was swollen, the old bridge half gone, but he urged the horse forward, praying under his breath. Twice he nearly lost his footing, but somehow he made it to the other side. By the time he returned with the doctor, drenched and shivering, Eli was barely conscious. The doctor worked through the night, Rachel's hands never leaving her son's. Caleb sat by the door, watching the two of them, the family that might have been his if life had gone another way. When dawn broke, the fever broke too. The doctor smiled, wearily. He'll live, he said. Rachel turned to Caleb, eyes full of tears. You saved him. He shook his head. No, ma'am. You did. But something had changed that night. Something deep and quiet. As the weeks passed, Eli grew strong again, and the bond between the three of them deepened. The town began to see them together more often, at church, at the market, by the river. Rachel's laughter returned, faint at first, then fuller, like music finding its way home. One evening, as the sun sank red over the horizon, Caleb stood by the fence watching Eli chase fireflies. Rachel joined him, her hand brushing his. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, Caleb, she said softly. I still love him, but I can't deny what I feel when you're near. He looked at her, his eyes gentle. I ain't asking for what's gone, Rachel. Just a chance to stay, to care, in whatever way you'll let me. Tears filled her eyes. You never stopped loving me, did you? Never had the chance to, he said. She leaned into him, and for the first time in years, she felt peace instead of pain. The sun faded, leaving only the soft hum of the prairie and the rhythm of two hearts learning to beat together again. Months passed, and Caleb built a small house on the edge of town, a place of his own, but close enough that Eli could visit whenever he wanted. Rachel came often, bringing pies or mended shirts, her laughter echoing across the fields. The people of Redstone began to smile when they saw them, whispering that maybe some stories did get second chances. But life in the West was never without shadows. One day, a rider came into town, a bounty hunter from Santa Fe. He asked for Caleb Turner by name. They met in front of the saloon, the air heavy with the promise of violence. "Turner," the man said, "you skipped a debt down south. My boss wants you brought in." Caleb stood tall, hands resting near his belt. "That was years ago. I paid my dues, not the way he figures." The man sneered, "We can do this easy, or I can put you down right here." Rachel came running from across the street, fear in her eyes. "Caleb?" "No." Caleb glanced at her, then back at the man. "There's a boy here who don't need to see this kind of thing. Let's take it outside town." They rode out to the ridge, the air thick with dust and tension. The duel was over quick, a single shot ringing through the canyon. When the echo died, the bounty hunter lay still, and Caleb's shoulder bled from a grazing wound. Rachel found him leaning against a rock, hale but alive. She fell to her knees beside him, pressing her hands to the wound. "You fool," she whispered. "Why didn't you run?" "Because I've been running my whole life," he said with a weak smile. Figured it was time to stand for something worth staying for. She pressed her forehead against his, tears falling freely. "You're worth everything to me, Caleb Turner. Don't you dare die now." He didn't. He healed, slowly, with her by his side. By the next spring, the land was green again, and Redstone seemed less lonely. Rachel and Caleb stood together outside the church one Sunday morning, Eli between them, his hand holding Caleb's. The preacher smiled as he passed, tipping his hat. "Fine day, isn't it?" Caleb nodded. "Yes, sir, finest I've seen in a long while." As they walked home, Rachel looked up at him. "You ever think about leaving again?" He smiled, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Not anymore. I've had enough trails. Think I'll stay right here." And he did. Years later, folks in Redstone still talked about Caleb Turner and Rachel Miller, the cowboy who came back from the dust and the woman who taught him how to live again. They said love like that was rare in the West, rarer still to last. But if you stand on the hill, above the town at sunset, you can still see two figures walking hand in hand through the tall grass, their shadows long and steady, their hearts bound by the same quiet promise that once brought them back together after all the years and all the miles. No matter how far the trail, love endures.